Hello everyone, my name is Wesley, this is Woo Can Cook. Today we're doing a Korean stew called Sundubu Jjigae, which uses kimchi and actually I think more iconically uses soft tofu, which we actually have Korean soft tofu today. We're going to talk about what the hell is Korean soft tofu and why it's so hard to find. So all that stuff coming up very soon. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I'll do my best to answer everybody. I don't know everything about Korean cooking, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful. A Sundubu Jjigae, if you're not familiar with it, is a form of Korean stew that's most traditionally done in a stone bowl, which is called a dolsot. You might recognize it if you've ever had Korean barbecue by dolsot bibimbap, which is that bowl that the dolsot bibimbap comes in, which is essentially a very, very hot stone bowl. Basically what we're doing in that case is you use the stone bowl to like cook in, so that's the thing that you cook in, which is useful for a couple of reasons, but mainly in our case, the reason that a dolsot is so important in this particular dish is so that you can do an egg drop into the thing that you're actually going to be serving out of. I don't own a dolsot stone bowl, so we're going to do it today inside of this wok, which I have going on behind me, which looks like this. I've got this stew going, and we're going to render that and then strain out all of those little fishes that are swimming around in there. So all of that and more coming up, and I will explain all of that, everything that I just said, and a couple other things too, actually. Hopefully I'll be able to find a dolsot bowl soon. So as always, if you're looking for the recipes, those always live over on my YouTube channel. So we're here streaming every Tuesday. The Friday prior to the stream is usually, not always, but almost always the thing that we're streaming. Probably it has a recipe video that goes along with it. Those generally come out on Fridays. So if you're looking for that stuff, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel and find all of that good stuff, because we've got lots of fun recipes coming out every Friday. Cool stuff coming. Last Friday was this recipe, and then this Friday coming up is going to be, I can't remember. Oh, this Friday coming up is going to be Chinese stinky tofu, which is called a chou tofu, which is essentially, is that what's coming? Or is it eggplant stir fry? I think it's chou tofu that's coming up. And that's it's like a Chinese tofu that's been fermented in like a bean paste, which is going to be really fun. So lots of stuff like that coming up very soon. All right, so first up, we're starting off with our garlic. Today, we're not going to use any ginger today because I think I ran out, but also because you generally wouldn't find ginger in Korean food. So we're sticking as close as we possibly can to what you more traditionally would find. In the recipe version that we had done, I used a tofu because I live here in Oakland, Chinatown, so Chinese ingredients, they tend to be a lot easier for me to find. So in that original recipe video that we did, I used Chinese tofu, which is the tofu that you see everywhere. Comes in a block, and looks like this big block, and you cut into it, and it's encased in water. And the reason that I did that is because I couldn't find Korean tofu, which looks like this, which I discovered the corner store around the corner from me, which is a Chinese grocery store, started stocking Korean tofu, which I love. The main difference, it's the same stuff, but the main difference being that it's packaged in a tube like this. Doesn't make that much of a difference in terms of flavor or taste. The only thing that it really changes is that because it's packaged in that way, it's going to present, and our finished dish is going to look a little bit different, and it's going to have more of like a kind of a different texture, because it's going to, it's not going to be chopped into cubes. It's going to be sort of broken apart out of the tube, which is nice. It's cool. But if you can't get your hands on Korean tofu like me, which I most of the time won't be able to find, it just so happens that the grocery stores down the street from me just started stocking it today, and it's very possible that they will stop stocking it if nobody buys it. So I probably will go back to using Chinese soft tofu pretty soon. I can't find this. So if you can't find it, you can also just use normal Chinese soft tofu. This is fine. Alright, So next up, so this is my green onions. So this is, I just separated. These are the whites of my green onions. We're going to add this into our fry and sort of bloom out the aromatic quality along with the garlic, which we call our aromatics because they're aromatic. And then we're going to take these greens that we just reserved and we're going to slice these up as thinly as we can. And then what I like doing when I slice up green onions, I love chopping them on a bias. And then we get these nice long and thin pieces of green onion. They sort of look like this. We get this nice shape to it. That's fun. And generally, essentially what that's doing is it's allowing the green onions, other than looking nice, it also just allows the green onions to have a little bit more of like a physical presence. It's like more present than it would be if we just sliced them really thinly straight because they wouldn't be quite as large. Alright, so those are our greens. We're going to save these. These are going to go on top of our stew, so they're going to be completely raw. But we don't have to worry too much about cross-contamination today, because we're not chopping any meat. Wait, no, we are chopping meat. Oh, we're chopping fish. No shellfish allergies, though. Alright, so next up what I'm going to dive into, these are our shrimp. Normally, and I mentioned this in the recipe video too, normally when you see me using shrimp, you'll probably see me using deveined shrimp already because it costs minimally more. It's usually like maybe $1 more. And what will happen is it will have already done all of the hard work for you, which I love, but I couldn't find them today, so now we're stuck with these, which we're going to have to devein ourselves. So essentially, generally when you come across a shrimp, it will look something like this. It still has its tail on, and then it will also have its legs on. In a lot of Chinese stir fries, especially like the old school stuff, my mom especially loves to eat these legs and then suck out the brains. The head of the shrimp is missing. A lot of old school Chinese people love doing that. I always thought that's really gross. To each their own. My mom likes doing that though, and so does my sister-in-law. What I'm doing though instead, because I think that's gross and I don't want to eat the shrimp legs, because when you put them in your mouth, they kind of feel like tiny legs, which is gross. So what I'm doing is I'm peeling those off because they're gross. And these are also part of the way worked through, so I think these are intended to be like partially shelled, so I think that's the reason why there's no head on it. But if you're cooking for someone old school that likes those heads, you're definitely missing half of the shrimp, I guess. Helpful, cool, yeah, thank you. Yay, helpful awards. All right, so once again though, as generally when I can find it, I like to tend towards pre-peeled and pre-veined shrimp. Generally not pre-peeled because that's a little bit harder to find, but already deveined are usually useful. So, and I will explain what deveining means in a second. So I'm using, this is going to be, I think this is 6 shrimp, mostly because I'm just cooking for myself, so I'm cooking a serving of 1. So, and also shrimp are really expensive, so I think this was like this bag was like $13 for like 20 shrimp, so, which is not cheap. Right. So, here's our shrimp. We have peeled them and removed their skin. You can absolutely just throw these into the stir fry right now. These are totally fine to eat. But when we work with shrimp, they will have this vein right here. Can we see that? You can kind of see it. And the camera's going to pull out of focus. But yeah, you can kind of see it. It has this little blue vein here at the bottom. That's actually not a vein. That's their poop line. So that's where all of the shrimp's poop lives. What we want to do is slice this open and pick out this vein, or thing that looks like a vein, so that we don't eat the shrimp's poop. If you don't mind eating the shrimp's poop, you can absolutely leave it in. Most of the old school Chinese people usually just leave it in. Actually, the first time I hadn't heard of deveining shrimp until I had started eating like Italian, like butter garlic shrimp, and like the way that Americans prepare shrimp. Because most of the time when you come across, you won't see it deveined. You won't even see it peeled. You will probably just see it served whole, just like head and all. But if you do have an issue with it, you can go ahead what we're doing is I'm flipping it over on its side like this, and then I'm using a paring knife here, and then we're basically slicing down the vein like so, and then picking this out. I think it's kind of gross to eat the shrimp's poop, but to each their own. Yeah. All right, last one. All right, so that's our shrimp. We're gonna set this aside. We could, if we wanted to, I'm gonna wok fry this a little bit. I'm gonna let this go in the wok for like maybe 20 seconds or so, just to pick up a little bit of texture to the shrimp. If you want though, you can absolutely just throw that straight into the stew itself. Because shrimp are so delicate and because they cook so quickly, they will do most of the stew will do most of its work for you. But I like to let that shrimp pick up a little bit of some texture from the wok fry. Shrimp coli, yeah, I guess that's a thing. Probably not. More likely you're gonna have issues with like shellfish allergies. So if you're cooking for somebody with shellfish, or probably most likely what you'll come across is just straight up food poisoning, because shrimp are very perishable. That's why you always see it sold frozen. All right, let's see. There it is. Okay. Next up, I'm going to set up, this is essentially like a sauce. What we're going to do is kind of use it to bolster our stew base, which is what we have going on the stove right now. We're going to keep it pretty simple because I like to highlight anytime that I'm working with like fresh dashi stock, which is what's cooking behind me. I like to kind of just stay out of the way of the stock and let the stock kind of work for itself. So that was 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, 1 tablespoon of sesame oil, and then this is going to be a single tablespoon of fish sauce. And if we have to, this is kind of unnecessary, but if we wanted to, we probably could have just thrown it straight into the stock base too. But here we are. Alrighty. Cool. All right, so last up, this is our tofu. I'm actually not going to cut this open. So if you were following the original recipe, what we did in that recipe is we had this block of Chinese tofu, which comes in a big old rectangle, and then we slice it up into cubes, and then we threw that into the stew towards the end because it's very delicate. What we're going to do instead, though, since we have our hands on some Korean tofu, is I'm going to slice this open right before we add it to the stew. And then just sort of break it apart by hand, and that's going to give us that nice presentation that we're looking for, which is sort of like hand crumbled. If you want, you could probably try and replicate that using Chinese tofu by breaking it apart by hand, slicing it into cubes, but I honestly don't think that it makes that much of a difference. It's mostly just the way that it kind of presents and how you have cubes of tofu instead of crumbles of tofu, but here we are. Alright, so over on the stove, this is something that I got a little bit earlier because it takes a little bit of time. It takes like 30 minutes for that to go. So this has been going on the stove for about 30 minutes. And essentially what it is a combination of, so this is some dried kombu, which is basically a type of sea kelp. And then this is some dried anchovies. And you very commonly will see those two elements come up a lot, not just in Korean food, but also in a lot of Japanese food too. And we use it to create what we call a dashi stock, which is essentially has a lot of the flavors that MSG comes from, which I recently learned is actually where the origins of MSG come from, is these salts and umamis that you get from dashi stock, which I didn't know that. So this has been going for about 30 minutes. It has reduced quite a bit, and I've actually been adding water to it as it's been going. So what I'm gonna do is bring us back over here, and then I'm gonna pass this stock through a sieve so that actually, do I want to do that? Actually, you know what? Let's just do this. I'm just gonna pick the stuff out so I don't have to clean this bowl. Shortcut. All right. Let's be lazy. All right, so I'm going to start off by picking out these anchovies first. The anchovies, we want to be a little bit careful because they're dried fish, which mostly means that their heads can snap off, in which case you're going to have to go through and fish out the fish head, which is a little bit gross if you leave it behind because you have all of that like fish head sort of floating around. Not so attractive. You also, by the way, like end up with a lot of like fish scales and stuff, other things that we generally don't want to appear in our stew. If you don't mind it, I don't mind it, so I'm just gonna leave it behind. But if you really want like a pristine dashi stock, you'll probably want to pass that through a mesh strainer. But I would rather not have to clean an extra bowl. So here I am. My tongs. All right, last up, I'm gonna pick out this piece of sea kelp, and let's get into it. So here's our stock, and you know what? I actually have to set this stock aside anyway. I forgot. Kajal, yeah, how's it going? You're from India, wow. There's a different time zone. Hello from Oakland. All right. So I'm pulling out our stock here, and then we're gonna put our wok back onto the stove. Oh, thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, please reply to, yeah, I could reply to everybody. There's room enough for everybody. Thanks, guys. All right. So I'm pulling my wok, just pulling my wok ring out. So by the way, if you're not familiar with what I just pulled out, this is the thing that was sitting underneath my wok. What I usually do is when we're cooking things like stews and stuff, we put the top of the wok ring, and that kind of just holds the wok in place. It's really useful when we're doing stuff like stews, but also things like deep fries and anything that we want to be very careful not to spill the wok, because as you'll notice, a round bottom wok is round on the bottom, which means it sort of just rolls around like this, which means if you're not careful, it will roll right off the stove, which is not fun. We don't want that to happen. Seriously, Defo, what's my favorite dish? Ooh, that's actually come up a couple times. And I'm not sure. I just got to think of a better answer for that. I have a lot of favorite dishes. One of, I think, like top 5, probably the dandan mian that we've done. I've been doing the vegetarian dandan mian, which is like a sesame paste noodle. I have always had like a strong affection for jjajangmyeon, that I've been eating that since I was a little kid. Basically all of the things that I've been eating since I was really young. The mapo tofu is one of my favorites. Those are some of like the really early recipes in the Wu Can Cook series. And then, yeah, I don't know, most of the Chinese stuff, probably like the meatball, the Shanghainese lion's head meatball. A lot of the Chinese stuff are my favorites. A little biased, I guess. Oh, and maybe all of the things that are like chow fun. So like the beef chow fun, the pad see ew, the pad kimao, anything with chow fun. I really like chow fun. So. Cool. Oh, my favorite fish. Thank you for correcting me. Yeah, my favorite fish. Ooh, I love a good salmon. I love a good skin on salmon, but that's also really basic. I was working with catfish yesterday, which is a really tasty fish. In terms of like stir fry fish, you generally don't stir fry a salmon. In terms of like stir fry fish, I usually lean towards like a tilapia or a cod, which happened to be sold out at the fish market yesterday. Maybe it's not in season. So I ended up using a catfish, which is a really great substitute. I always thought that catfish kind of was a little bit gamey, but it's actually really tasty. And I used it for a salt and pepper fish, which is really tasty. It's coming up soon. All right, so I'm gonna start off with a quick wok fry here. Here's our aromatics. This is our garlic. followed by the whites of our green onions. And then we're going to bloom that. I usually let it go for about 15 seconds or so. And then mostly what I'm looking for is when it becomes aromatic. So use your nose at this point. We're starting to smell. When we start to smell garlic and green onions, it's a good place to be. All right, that's my shrimp going in next. And then what I like to do is we're going to add, this is maybe the most important element into it in a Sundubu Jjigae. This is going to be 2 tablespoons of gochugaru, which is a form of Korean chili paste. And I'm very intentionally adding that to the side of the things that are already in the wok. So it's over here on the side here. And we want to make sure that this gets good, solid contact with the surface area of the wok. And that's going to just like bloom out a lot of the aromatic qualities of that gochugaru. It is a very, very fragrant element. All right, next up, that's a kimchi. About a half cup or so. I'm kind of eyeballing it. I like to put the kimchi in a little bit before the stew if you want. If you don't mind the real abrasiveness of kimchi, you can throw it in with the stew. I like to give it a little bit of time on the wok heat because it kind of like helps burn off a little bit of that acidity, and it's like a little bit less like in your face, not quite as yeah, it's just not quite as much. It's not quite so intentional, and it kind of like pulls kimchi back a little bit. We do the same thing with our kimchi fried rice. It kind of like mellows out the kimchi nicely. So that's our stock that I just added back in, and then I'm going to add a couple more things. Here's our sauce base, which was mostly soy sauce and sesame oil with a little bit of fish sauce. And then the last thing that I'm going to add here before we add our tofu is a little bit of kimchi brine, which I happen to be using a form of kimchi or a brand of kimchi that has a lot of brine in it. If you have especially if you buy kimchi in really large quantities, you might not be able to get that brine out. So that I like to say is an optional element. But if you can get that brine out, kimchi brine is real nice in pretty much anything that has kimchi in it. It's going to give you that nice briny quality that we're looking for. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, seriously, how do you not burn the garlic? Yeah, lots of people ask me that. So definitely, like, I know that I've seen a lot of people afraid to add the garlic in too early because they're worried that it will burn. Which is true, that it will definitely burn if you add it in really early and you're planning on having that wok empty for a while. So usually, so for example, when we do the fried rices in our pop-ups, we also we start with the proteins. So we start with the lapchang and then we add the garlic in afterward. And the reason for that is because the thing that's in the wok is going to be the lapchang for a while. Like that lapchang is going to take a good 5 minutes or so before it has cooked through. But in a stew like this, you'll notice that like as soon as I put in that garlic, I was kind of moving pretty fast. We were moving fast to get other things in the wok. And the reason for that is because we want to add it in early while the wok is empty. And then we can kind of bloom out that aromatic quality. Usually within that first 15 seconds that's when all of those aromatics start coming out. And you can't see it on the webcam, but if you were here, it's very, very fragrant. You can smell it. It's very, very garlicky. Usually if there's ginger involved, there's very, very gingery. The green onions, they start blooming out. And that's within that first 15 seconds. If you pass that 15 seconds, you get into the realm of like 30 or 40 seconds after it's been in the wok, and that's still the only thing in the wok, that's probably gonna start burning. But if you time it out properly, so if you're say like making say like a mapo tofu, for example, the next thing that goes into the wok should be that ground pork. So if that ground pork gets into the wok in the right timing, then it should not be burning because now you're cooking that ground pork. So if there's other things going on, the ginger and garlic, it probably shouldn't burn. But if it is the only thing that's in the wok, so if you're gonna add that garlic and ginger, then you're gonna add something like, say, you're gonna add Like if you're going to add tofu, for example, and you're not going to add very much of it, then that's going to be still the only thing that's really in the wok, then it will for sure burn, and I have made that mistake before. So it depends what you're cooking. If you're planning on having that wok empty, hold back that ginger. I do it a lot. I hold back the garlic and ginger, and then I'll add it later, and just make sure that we add it and do the same thing that we did with that gochugaru. Make sure that it hits the wok surface, and that's going to bloom out your aromatic qualities for you. But yeah, I see that a lot of folks ask me, like, how do we make sure that the garlic doesn't burn? Aren't you worried that it's going to burn when you add it in that early? But it really won't burn as long as you time things out properly and you make sure that you add the next thing properly. Yeah. Jonathan, oh yeah, thank you. How many instruments can I play? Yeah, I have lost count. I can play every instrument that you're listening to under my voiceover is something that I've played. So I play guitar. I play guitar and I sing. Those are probably the main two instruments that I play. I'm also getting pretty good at keys. Not so great at piano, but getting pretty good at keys though. And the difference is pretty substantial actually. But getting pretty good at keys. I've been getting pretty good at playing the MPC, so like finger drumming basically. What else? I play a lot of wind instruments, so I play the saxophone, I play the clarinet. What else? Bass, I play the bass guitar. I can't remember what else. Classical guitar, a lot of guitars, a lot of things. I play a lot of instruments. Only two of them. I only do two of them that well. Brass, yeah, that I cannot do. That's one of the things that I can't do, is play brass. So usually if you're listening to one of the Woo Cooks Beats mixes and you hear a brass instrument, it's either sampled or I recreated it using a synth, which is not easy to do, but you could get pretty close using a Nord lead synth. So a lot of times if you're listening, so like especially the Trace Repeat stuff, that's probably either sampled or it's our horn player. His name is Josh, and he's a really, really talented trumpet player. Yeah, but brass is a whole different skill set because of the way that the sound is produced. It's like it requires that you know how to buzz, which I can't really do with my lips. Yeah, it's a whole different skill set. So saxophone, I've been playing saxophone since I was a little kid. Guitar, I've been playing since I was like a teenager. So most of those things are relatively easy for me. But yeah, generally, if you're listening, probably play almost all of the instruments on it, except for probably the vocal stem, which is sampled. Paul, how's it going? Yeah. Officially designated public holiday week. Yes. Officially designated public holiday. Not Christmas. Alright. Yeah, thanks everyone. So, this is going to stew for a little while. I like to let this go for maybe 10 minutes or so. I think it's been going for about 5 already. So it is. I know that it is in the name, and I think like it is pretty common to refer to Sundubu Jjigae as Korean spicy soft tofu stew. But in my opinion, I don't actually think it's that spicy. I think it looks really spicy. I think that it has this very fleeting quality about it because of that gochugaru. It makes it very, very bright red, and it kind of just like has this very lethal look to it because it's so deep red, and that's really just coming from that chili powder. But gochugaru in itself is actually not that spicy. It's about as spicy as most American chili powder is, which is like mildly spicy, not nearly as spicy as like cayenne pepper or something on the same plane. So I actually don't think it's that spicy because most of where that dark red color comes from is the gochugaru, and I think that the name is a little bit misleading, but we can go ahead and call it spicy tofu, I guess. But yeah, generally if you're seeing some kind of Korean food cooked and you see it that it's bright red, it's probably coming from one of two things. Usually the main thing that I use most often is probably gochujang, which is quite spicy, and you want to use that very sparingly. But gochugaru, on the other hand, also gives this very red color, but it's not nearly as abrasive and like intentional as gochujang is. Yeah. Just a stoner. That is a good username. Oh yeah, so say if you're using mushroom and garlic, any tips? Yes, so mushroom is, it depends on what kind of mushroom. If we're talking about like button mushrooms, like fresh mushrooms, I usually like to hold those back a little bit because mushrooms are very spongy, so they're going to absorb a lot of the things that they're in, and they will also shed lots of water after they do that. So usually when I add mushrooms, it's going to be towards the end of a stir fry because they're so delicate and also because they absorb stuff. So if you add a mushroom in too early, it's going to absorb your cooking oil, which is the same way that eggplant behaves, is that when you add it in, it starts absorbing all of that eggplant until it becomes basically just saturated in cooking oil, which we don't want. That's never a good thing with your mushroom. So unless that is what you're trying to do, sometimes I'll do that in a French omelet and let it kind of absorb the butter, and then you have this really buttery mushroom, which is really delicious. But on the other hand, if that's not what you want, say if you're making a stir fry and you're using like fresh button mushrooms or something, you want to add those late, otherwise they're going to start becoming really, really oily, and then you're going to bite into it and it's going to just sort of like squeeze out oil, which is not attractive. They're also really delicate too, so it's nice to just give it a little bit of extra, a little bit less time than the other things like garlic. And I also don't think that there's any real benefit to adding a mushroom in really early. On the other hand, if you're using like a dried and rehydrated mushroom, like a shiitake mushroom, which we do all the time, I like to add those in a little bit early because I like to throw it into the wok fry and then let the wok heat kind of burn off a little bit of the moisture that's going on in that shiitake. But again, same concept, it's still going to absorb anything that it kind of hits. So we want to work quickly once that's in the wok and get other things involved as soon as it's in the wok, otherwise it's going to start absorbing stuff. KTC, no, oh yeah, like tandoori cooking, yeah. I haven't gotten into too much yet. I've been meaning to do that more, but it's just like, it's a whole different ball game. It's on my to-do list, but it's not something that I've gotten into lately. And actually, if you've like looked at like the recipes that are on the Wu Can Cook channel, you'll notice that there's very specifically no Indian food in it because I just don't know how to cook it very well. So as soon as I get better at doing it, I will probably start making more recipes for it. One buddy of mine asked me to do a chicken masala pot pie, so like a chicken pot pie, but using chicken masala, chicken tikka masala, which I think is a really cool idea. But the problem being is that the last like 3 times that I've done chicken tikka masala, I messed it up really bad and the yogurt curdled, and I have to figure out how to make tikka masala better before I can do that. All right, so I'm getting ready to add my tofu in, and our camera is off. So. So I just cut this tofu open, and what's going on, same thing that you would see if we were cutting open a square of Chinese tofu. There's all this water in here, so it's not going to make a huge difference, but generally speaking, I like to make sure that that water doesn't get into my wok fry because when I add moisture to stuff, I want it to be intentional. So what I'm doing is I'm just draining off a little bit of that water so that doesn't head into our stew later on. Right, so here's our tofu, and what I'm doing is I'm just going to break this apart by hand, and that's going to give us this nice presentation that we're looking for here, which is essentially hand crushed tofu, and we get these big old blocks of tofu like so. Looks awesome. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is going to be really tasty. I'm very excited. Anytime that we're working with soft tofu, once that stuff is in our stir fry, I say this a lot anytime that we're using it, but I'll keep saying it. You want to be very, very intentional with the way that you shift things in the wok now. So we don't want to get in there and start shoveling stuff around with that really, really sharp metal spatula. Because soft tofu is, in its name, very, very soft, which means it's very, very delicate. So if you go in there and start being really, really aggressive with the way that you're handling the wok, it's going to start breaking up the tofu. And that's how you get, if you've ever had a stir fry with tofu that's all in crumbled little bits, we don't want that. and it's kind of like eating like tofu crumble, which is not what we're after here. We want to kind of let that retain its shape as much as possible. So the way that we approach our wok fry at this point onward should be very intentional. We don't want to get in there and start digging stuff around anymore, like we were doing earlier. All right, so I'm gonna let that reduce. I'm turning the fire back up and I'm gonna let it reduce just a little bit more. It's got a little bit more water than I'd like it to be, so I'm gonna let that come down maybe another like 2-3 minutes. I'm gonna bring it to a boil and let it simmer a little bit longer. And then the last thing that we're gonna do is our egg drop, which is the trickiest part and also the reason why we need a dolsot bowl. So a dolsot bowl, I mentioned this earlier, a dolsot stone bowl is the thing that you would traditionally use to make Sundubu Jjigae, and essentially what it is basically a big pot, or like a small personal sized pot, or you could do like a really big dolsot bowl. But usually it's a small personal sized bowl, and it's made out of stone, so it goes right on top of your gas range or your coil range. You can cook in it. So usually what you would do is if you're making it in a really big dolsot bowl, you cook inside of it and cook the whole thing in there. If you're making a personal sized thing, you can cook directly inside of that dolsot bowl, which is very useful for a couple of reasons. It cuts down on dishes, number one, but also number two, the next thing that we're going to do is an egg drop. So we're going to drop our egg into the stew. So without that dolsot bowl, it makes it very difficult to retain the shape of that egg drop. Because what we actually want to be doing is doing our egg drop into the serving bowl. So whatever it is that's going to end up on the table, we want to do your egg drop in there so that we don't have to run the risk of breaking your egg drop open, which is going to basically fracture the yolk, which we don't want to do. I don't own a dolsot bowl. I also don't own anything that's relatively close to a dolsot bowl, which is why we're cooking in the wok fry. So that means that we're going to have to like navigate it. In the original video that we did, in the recipe video that came out on Friday, what I did was I stewed it in the wok and then I served it into basically just like a plain old glass bowl. And then I did the egg drop into the serving bowl. And that took a really long time for it to set. So in the video, I cut out all of the time that I was waiting. But it took like almost 30 minutes for that egg to set because there's no constant heat going on. And without the rolling heat, it takes a really long time for egg to set. Because what we want is basically the simmer. That's how we're going to get the egg to set. And I think when I did the original recipe video, I put it in the microwave for a couple seconds. I put it in the microwave for like 20 seconds to kind of just hurry up that egg to set because it was legitimately taking that long for it to set. So today I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to wait that long. So I'm going to do our egg drop straight into the stew, and we're going to hope that it doesn't break open, basically. So for our egg drop, I'm going to turn this down. We want a very, very gentle simmer. And then here's our first egg and our second egg. And then I'm just going to ladle a little bit of liquid on top, and that's basically just going to help the whites of our eggs set a little bit. Like so. So by the way, if you're not comfortable doing egg drops, you could also do this with a hard-boiled egg, or I'm pretty sure, because this happens in all Korean food, you could also finish it with a fried egg, and that's a very, very common Korean thing to do, is finish a dish with a fried egg, like a wok fried, lacy fried egg, super high heat, very common thing to do. I personally think that the egg drop is like a really iconic part of the Sundubu Jjigae, but to each their own. So this is the easy part, getting the egg drop to set in the wok. That's the easy part. Getting it out of the wok, that's going to be the hard part, and we're going to have to pray that it doesn't crack open when we serve it. That's going to be the hard part. Cool. Yeah. last time you tried this, this was the exact stage that you ruined with the eggs. Yeah, this is probably the hardest part, is the egg drop, because a lot of things can go wrong in the egg drop. So I should probably, just as I said that, stop turning around and pay attention. So definitely, if the fire's too hot, it will crack the egg open. If it's too low, it won't cook all the way through, and it'll do basically the same thing that would happen if we were on the serving bowl here. But you can kind of see what's going on. Can you see it? Yeah, you can see it on YouTube. You can't really see it on Reddit because the screen's too small. But you can see here's our egg, and it's starting to set. All of this whites is setting all around here. And here's our second egg, which might look even better. Yeah, this is what we're looking for here, is all of this egg white that's sort of setting all around here. That's what we're looking for here. Very, very important. We don't want to go in there and start shoveling stuff around again, because now especially, earlier we were being very careful not to break up that soft tofu, but now especially we want to be very, very careful not to crack that egg open. Again, not the worst case scenario. If it does break open, you're basically just going to have an egg drop soup, which is going to be nice anyway. But ideally, we want to hold that egg yolk in its shape before it gets on the table, and then we want to break that open on the table because it's going to be real nice and good presentation. Yeah, I think that's it. I think we're there. All right, here's the hard part. One out of two. Nobody look at the second yolk. 1 out of 2. I broke the second yolk, but the first yolk is still intact. The best we can hope for. Alright. Honestly, this is actually not the right spoon. If you've never gotten Korean food before, generally when you eat Korean food, the spoon that you'll get, this is the spoon that you would eat Chinese food with. It's a glass ceramic spoon. Probably looks very similar if you've ever eaten like Vietnamese pho, same spoon that you would eat with that. But in Korean food, you actually don't use these. You would eat it with, it's like a really, really long spoon, and that's like long and probably closer to this shape. I should probably get some Korean utensils too, but the main reason that I point that out is because you can't break open an egg drop with a spoon like that. It's too, there's no fine edges to it. Yeah. All right. So here's our egg drop. How do we do? Yeah. That's what we're looking for. And this essentially is our yolk is like nice and soft boiled. That's the egg drop that we're looking for there. It's my green onions. Meatloaf said 1 out of 2 ain't bad. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I could live with 1 out of 2. There have definitely been recipes where I fractured 2 out of 2, though. That sucks when that happens. Cool. Yeah. One of my favorite stews, a really good stew to go take on, because it's really easy. Honestly, it's not a very complicated stew. Mostly just about timing. The only thing that we chopped today was the garlic. The rest of it just kind of happens in the wok. And most of it is just waiting. A lot of it is just kind of waiting for things to reduce, timing stuff out. So really good one to do in the winter. I love doing things like this one in particular, but also just generally stuff like this in the winter because this stew produces a lot of steam and it kind of heats the house up for you, which I love because it's really cold in the house right now. And you can save on heating costs, but also just because it's really hot and it kind of warms you up a little bit. One of my favorite stews. It's also a really, really simple one to do. I love simple stuff. I love doing recipes that are really easy to do because it means that other people are going to do them too. I don't generally like to do stuff that's really hard unless it's something that I've been looking forward to for a long time. I generally don't like to try and avoid stuff that like it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for other people to take on. So right now I'm working on a Chinese pork bun, tasi bao, which is something that I've literally been meaning to make a tasi bao since I started the YouTube channel. But I've been avoiding it for so long because it's really, really hard. And I also don't think other people are going to do it. I think it's so hard that nobody's going to try and do this either because tasi is easy enough to source and also tasi baos are easy enough to source. And you don't need to make it yourself, but I'm going to take a shot at it. That's actually coming. I'm going to do that. I'm going to start working on that right after this stream, actually. So hopefully it goes well. We'll see. Cool. How rubbery are the shrimp? Yeah, so that's a good question. I always worry about that too because they tend to get rubbery if you don't treat them properly. I personally like them to be curled like this. This is generally a sign that it's been cooked for quite a while. What we're looking for generally is if it's not overcooked, it will kind of like won't be quite as curled. But I like my shrimp to be a little bit over like that. If you don't like your shrimp over and basically like this, add it later. So basically add it towards the end. You can add it basically after the egg drop. You can add it after the egg drop, and then it won't quite curl like that. I personally like my shrimp like that, but I know that other people don't. So I like to add the shrimp really early and then let it hit the wok heat and then sort of like pick up a little bit of texture. I know other people don't like that though. So yeah, if you are worried about that, add it a little bit later. Basically, because shrimp is so delicate and because it can cook on really, really gentle heat, you can literally add it in after the egg drop and it will come out great. The only thing that I advocate for when you use shrimp is peel it before you add it to the stew. I know that it's a big thing to leave shrimp unpeeled and throw it in the stew. This is like a thing that you will see in a lot of Chinese food. Like everything that you will ever order in Chinese cuisine that has shrimp in it is served with the shells on, which I fucking hate because then you gotta peel this shrimp, especially if you're eating stew. It's really, really annoying to try and peel that shrimp while eating the stew. So because then you got to pick the tails off. You also have to pick the legs off if you don't like eating shrimp legs. So the only thing that I really advocate for about shrimp is the peel thing before it goes into the stew. That's a really big pet peeve of mine. It's unpeeled shrimp in a finished dish. It's disgusting. I don't know why people do it. I don't know why Chinese cooks love doing that. I don't know why it happens so much in all of Chinese food, but I want people to stop doing it. It's terrible. Cool. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Tuesday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out on my YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday was the recipe for this Sundubu Jjigae, which is inspired by a scene from The Americans, which is like a thing that has had a resurgence lately. More recently, it's on Amazon Prime right now, and I binge watched it. Noticed that they make this, which is really interesting. And one thing that I noticed about it is that it's like a very challenging thing for her to make, which it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be challenging because there's nothing complicated about it. But they actually do talk about the dolsot stone bowl in that series too, which I thought was really interesting. And I probably am gonna go out and get a dolsot bowl soon. So yeah. Cool. Yeah. So all that stuff and more, if you're looking for it, it lives over on the YouTube channel. If you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, we're working our way up to 6,000 subscribers by the end of the month, which is in a couple of days, and I think we're getting pretty close to. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over, give it a subscribe if you're interested. Only if you're interested. Don't subscribe if you're not interested. I don't know why people do. What's coming up? This Friday coming up is going to be, I believe, is going to be the recipe for, we're doing stinky tofu, which I'm really excited for, and it's also really challenging. Stinky tofu, if you're not familiar with it, it's called tofu in Chinese cuisine, and is essentially a firm tofu that has been long fermented in fermented bean curd, and it has this very, very pungent flavor, pungent quality to it. Most people refer to it as stinky. It just, like, literally just smells. It smells very, very strongly. And then you fry it in a shallow fry, and it has this very crisp quality to it. So that's coming out on Friday. Also a very simple one to do. Probably the hardest part, just like this, the hardest part is sourcing the ingredients. So you have to find a fermented bean curd, which is a little bit tricky to locate. Cool. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Wesley, this is Woo Can Cook, and we'll be back next Tuesday doing, I forget what we're doing. I think we're doing Tamiya next Tuesday. All right, thanks guys, bye.
Tastes like strawberries on a summer evening, and it sounds just like a song. I want more berries and that summer feeling. It's so wonderful and warm. Breathe me in, breathe me out. I don't know if I could ever go without. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know if I could ever go without watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar. Strawberries on a summer evening. Baby, you're the end of June. I want your belly and that summer feeling, getting washed away in you. Breathe me in, breathe me out. I don't know if I could ever go without watermelon sugar high, 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 watermelon sugar high. I just wanna taste ya, I just wanna taste ya, watermelon sugar high.
It bothers me and I'm feeling unhappy. I just try and think of nice things. Like why am I there? Well, let me see. Nice things. Daffodils. Green meadows. Raindrops on roses. Whiskers on kittens. Cream-colored ponies and crisp apple strudels. Doorbells and sleigh bells and schnitzel with noodles. Wild geese that fly with the moon on their wings. These are a few of my favorite things. Girls in white dresses with blue satin sashes. Snowflakes that stay on my nose and eyelashes. Silver white winters that melt into springs. These are a few of my favorite things. When the dog bites, when the bee stings, when I'm feeling sad, I
to the boogie line. Side step right, left to my beat. I like the moon, rock with me, baby. Know that I got that heat. Let me shake it, stop it, shit. Side step right, left to my beat. Get it, let it roll.
Closed off from love, I didn't need the pain. Once or twice was enough, and it was all in vain. Time starts to pass before you know it, you're frozen. Ooh. But something happened for the very first time with you. My heart melted to the ground, found something true. And everyone's looking round, thinking I'm going crazy. But I don't care what they say. I'm in love with you. They try to pull me away, but they don't know the truth. My heart's crippled by the vein that I keep on closing. You cut me open and I keep bleeding, keep bleeding love. I keep bleeding, I keep bleeding love. Keep bleeding, keep bleeding love. You cut me open, trying hard not to hear, but they talk so loud. Their piercing sounds fill my ears, try to fill me with doubt. Yet I know that the goal is to keep me from falling. Hey, but nothing's greater than the risk that comes with your embrace. And in this world of loneliness, I see your face. Yet everyone around me thinks that I'm going crazy. Maybe, but I don't care what they say. I'm in love with you. They try to pull me away, but they don't know the truth. My heart's crippled by the vein that I keep on closing. You cut me open and I keep bleeding, keep bleeding love. I keep bleeding, I keep bleeding love. Keep bleeding, keep bleeding love.
Baby hair with a woman's eyes. I can feel you watching in the night. All alone with me, we're waiting for the sunlight. When I feel cold, you warm me. And when I feel I can't go on, you come and hold me. It's you and me forever. Oh, won't you smile for me, Sarah? If you feel like leaving, you know you can go. But why don't you stay?